glasses was lean. I saw a metal mile marker on the left side of the road, and with all my might, I stretched my foot to hit the accelerator, and I got my hand on the steering wheel. I gave it all the gas and sped to the side. The ski masked man released the belt and ducked behind the seats just as we crashed into the steel pole. The airbag exploded, and then his voice cut through the sound of the last gasps of the blonde girl, and I heard him say, "I am the Red Mask of Death. Behold my presence." Everything went black for a moment, and then I was back in the junkyard. I gulped for air as I fell out of the car.
Here we
I
are.
felt something wet on my forehead. My hand reached up, and when I pulled it back, it was covered with blood. My blood.
3, 4,
My neck
5.
also felt like it had been squeezed in a noose.
1, 2, 3.
Okay, that was it. I was done.
1,
I wasn't just
2.
experiencing other people's deaths. I almost died this time. It was nearly dawn, and my uncle would be there soon, but I didn't care. I was officially quitting, and I wanted out of this junkyard now. I couldn't spend one more minute in this place.
Hey, it's your fault
I
for being
marched over to
curious.
the office, swung open the door, and started to ransack the room, looking for another key to get out. I rifled through the file cabinet, and then I pulled open every drawer on my
Sometimes
uncle's desk.
curiosity is not a good thing.
Laying in one of the drawers was a red
Human.
ski mask, a leather belt, and mirrored shades, and the room started to spin. I stepped back. I would faint if I didn't sit down, and just then the office door swung open. Uncle Ned's gaze met mine, and then his eyes went to the desk in the open drawer. I backed up into a far corner of the office. Not a word was said between us, but he knew that I knew. My uncle reached down and grabbed the ski mask, and he pulled it over his head. He slid on the mirrored shades, and finally the belt was stretched out between both his hands
You're gonna die.
as he stepped towards me. In the blink of an eye, Uncle Ned had transformed from an annoying relative to pure menace. He wasn't slumping and middle-aged anymore. Instead, he stood straight up, his shoulders back. He seemed big. His breathing seemed amplified, the huffing and puffing of a large animal, a predator. He kept coming forward, and he said, "I am the Red Mask of Death. Behold my presence." He snapped the belt in his hands. It sounded like a whip cracking. Rascal appeared in the doorway and whined. Uncle Ned turned for a moment to look at the dog. A distraction, needing a chance for me. I bolted forward and I pushed past my uncle out of the door. I scrambled to the front gate, passing my uncle's car, and I reached it, but it was locked. I turned to see Uncle Ned stomping towards me. I tried to climb the fence, but I couldn't. A hand grabbed the back of my shirt and it threw me to the ground. And then the belt was looped around my neck. I was being dragged backwards, and I couldn't stop it. After about 30 yards of being pulled through the dirt, my uncle stopped, and I looked around and realized we were by the car crusher, and then a boot smashed into my ribs. I was almost unconscious. Through the haze, I saw my uncle open a trunk on one of the junk cars. Even though I was almost passed out, I knew what he was going to do. And I tried to stand, but I couldn't. Uncle Ned stepped toward me, the belt once again in his hand. And then he paused and turned to his right. He dropped the belt, and his hands went up in front of him. as if to stop something coming his way. The blue Mazda, the Deader car, smashed into my uncle, his body rolling over the hood and bouncing off the roof. He then fell with a thud on the ground, about 20 feet away from me, and I heard him moan in pain. And then the forklift started up, even though there was no one behind the wheel.
Cool.
I watched as it drove
This
over
one.
to Uncle Ned, and it slid its 2 forks under his body, and it lifted him up. He was dropped into the trunk of the car that was meant for me. I managed to stand up then, still just watching. The trunk shut, and then the forklift speared the car and took it to the crusher. I saw the car smasher as the walls closed in.
You got rocket.
I looked over to the Mazda. The young woman watched as my uncle's car was slowly squeezed together. The 4
Yeah,
walls of
you
the car
got rocket.
crusher released to reveal the metal hunk that was now Uncle Ned's coffin. The forklift pulled it out of the machine, and it laid it on a pile of other metal hunks ready to be recycled. It was done. The Mazda started up again. The blonde woman at the wheel nodded and drove back to her spot amongst the other debtors. After all the violence and noise, there was only silence. I stood for a moment, and then I realized that each of the cars I'd been in was leading me to this. The green Chevy wasn't trying to run me down. It just wanted to make sure I did go back to my uncle's place and get behind the wheel of one of the debtors. I just chose the wrong one. The black van and the text offering, "We'll take you there," was about making sure I did return, since I'd chosen the wrong car again. They wanted me to learn the truth about my uncle. He'd killed, and he would kill again if he wasn't stopped. Somehow a living person had to acknowledge his evil deeds to complete his punishment. It seemed that the dead do communicate, at least in this junkyard. I looked over to the main gate, and I saw that it was now open. At this point, I didn't question it. I was just happy that it happened. I gave Rascal a final pat on the head, another bowl of water and food, and I started my long walk home. Later that afternoon, when I went back to work at my uncle's,